Before the Spaniards ever set foot on the shores of the New World, before the Aztecs rose to dominate the Valley of Mexico, there was a civilization that had already reached astonishing heights of science, art, architecture, and mathematics in the lush jungles of Mesoamerica. The Maya. A people whose brilliance still echoes through time in towering pyramids, cryptic glyphs, and celestial knowledge so advanced it rivals even today's astronomers. Yet, despite their staggering accomplishments, their cities fell silent. Their temples crumbled. Their society collapsed. Why? Today, we journey into the depths of history to uncover the story of the Mayan civilization, its rise, its golden age, and its mysterious fall. If you enjoy exploring ancient empires and the lost wisdom of forgotten peoples, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from, and what you'd like to learn about next. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1: Dawn in the Rainforest, The Origins of the Maya. Before there were cities, before glyphs etched names into stone or temples pierced the jungle canopy, there were small villages nestled along riverbanks and highland valleys. In the shadowy cradle of time, around 2000 BCE, the ancestors of the Maya were already stirring. They were not yet building pyramids or mapping constellations, but they were doing something just as important: learning to grow maize. The domestication of maize, beans, and squash formed the agricultural triad that would sustain Maya society for centuries. This was no simple act of subsistence, it was spiritual. To the Maya, maize was not just food. It was life itself. The gods had fashioned humanity from maize dough, and to plant and harvest it was to participate in the divine order. Farming became not just labor, but a sacred rhythm, one tied to the movement of the heavens, the whisper of rain, the fertility of the soil. Early Maya communities were organized in modest settlements, their homes built of wattle and daub, their roofs thatched with palm. But even then, evidence of ceremony and cosmology began to appear. Graves were placed under homes. Ritual items were buried alongside the dead. Even in these early days, the Maya showed a fascination with death, with lineage, and with the sacred role of the family in the spiritual fabric of the world. But the Maya did not rise in isolation. To their west, the Olmecs, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, were constructing colossal stone heads and ceremonial centers. From them, the Maya would absorb key innovations: sacred kingship, calendrical cycles, and symbolic iconography. Yet the Maya would not merely imitate. They would refine. They would expand. They would transform these seeds into a civilization that would one day command the stars. As centuries passed, the small farming communities began to evolve. Trade networks expanded. Villages grew into ceremonial centers. The slow churning of generations gave birth to hierarchy, ritual, and centralized power. By 1000 BCE, the Maya were no longer simply surviving. They were building. And what they would build would echo across time. Chapter 2: Giants in the Jungle, The Rise of Nakbi, El Mirador, and the Pre-Classic Maya World. By the first millennium BCE, the scattered farming villages of the early Maya began to coalesce into something far greater: proto-cities, sacred spaces meticulously shaped not only by human hands, but by celestial vision. The world was no longer a place to merely survive. It had become a stage for cosmological expression. And in the steamy lowlands of what is now northern Guatemala, a transformation was underway that would rewrite the destiny of Mesoamerica. The Preclassic period, which stretches from roughly 2000 BCE to 250 CE, is often overshadowed by the grandeur of the classic Maya. But it was here, in the heart of the rainforest, that the Maya laid their foundational stones, both literally and symbolically. At its peak, the Preclassic Maya world witnessed the birth of monumental architecture, dynastic power, religious centralization, and complex urban planning. The earliest signs of this transformation appeared in places like Nakbi, one of the oldest known Maya ceremonial centers. Dating back to at least 800 BCE, Nakbi reveals the fingerprints of a people already obsessed with verticality, symmetry, and sacred alignment. Pyramidal platforms rose above jungle floor. Stucco masks adorned stairways, staring out into eternity. Causeways connected plazas, forming geometric grids that spoke of a mind already thinking not in mere habitation, but in cosmic order. Nakbi's significance lies not just in its scale, but in its intention. The site was constructed according to sacred principles, aligned to solstices and cardinal directions, designed to reflect the Maya belief that cities were not just centers of human power, but mirrors of the universe. The city became a microcosm, with its central pyramid symbolizing the axis mundi, the world tree that connected the underworld, earth, and the heavens above. But if Nakbi was the spark, then El Mirador, its younger sibling to the north, was the full-blown fire. Emerging around 600 BCE and peaking between 300 BCE and 100 CE, El Mirador became the first true megacity of the Maya world, and possibly the largest city in the entire pre-Columbian Americas at its height. Sprawling over 10 square miles, it housed tens of thousands, perhaps even over 100,000 people. At the heart of El Mirador stood La Danta, a temple pyramid so massive it rivals the Great Pyramid of Giza in total volume. Rising over 70 meters, 230 feet, from the jungle floor and constructed from millions of limestone blocks, it remains one of the largest human-made structures in the ancient world. And it wasn't alone. El Mirador was filled with similarly grand structures, connected by raised causeways called sakbiab that stretched for kilometers, binding together temples, plazas, and ceremonial sites into a sacred whole. But why build so big? Why here, in the thick of the jungle, with no beasts of burden, no wheeled carts, and no metal tools? Because for the pre-classic Maya, architecture was not just shelter, it was theology in stone. Every platform, stairway, and temple mimicked the topography of the cosmos. Ascending a pyramid was ascending the sacred mountain of creation. The act of building was an act of devotion, a statement that the human realm could align itself with the divine. And yet, for all its grandeur, El Mirador remains shrouded in mystery. It rose, flourished, and collapsed all before the dawn of the Classic period. By 150 CE, the great city was largely abandoned. Some scholars suggest environmental degradation, deforestation, soil erosion, and the unsustainable demands of monumental construction played a role. Others cite political fragmentation or external conflict. Whatever the cause, El Mirador vanished into the green silence of the rainforest, leaving behind towering temples and unanswered questions. Still, its legacy was profound. The political and religious blueprint it pioneered would be adopted, and perfected, by future Maya cities. Its dynastic traditions, its symbolic architecture, and its fusion of time, power, and divinity would echo into the Classic period and beyond. Meanwhile, across the Maya lowlands and highlands, dozens of other centers began to rise. San Bartolo emerged with its exquisite murals, depicting maize gods and mythic birth. Civil, Saros, and Kaminaljuyu flourished with their own rituals and trade routes, their influence reaching as far as the Pacific and Gulf coasts. This era was a crucible. It gave birth to the long count calendar, a system of timekeeping so precise that it charted millions of years both backward and forward. It formalized the use of zero, centuries before it appeared in Europe or Asia. And it witnessed the creation of the earliest Maya hieroglyphs, etched into stelae, painted in tombs, and carved into altars, each one a seed of memory planted for eternity. By the end of the pre-classic period, the Maya had transformed themselves. They were no longer simply a people of the forest. They had become builders of meaning, engineers of time, and custodians of cosmic order. The stage was now set for their most breathtaking act. The Classic period was about to dawn. Chapter 3, Thrones of Stone, Tikal, Kalakmul, and the Classic Age of Kings. As the first rays of the 3rd century CE filtered through the rainforest canopy, the Maya world stood on the cusp of transformation. The pre-classic megacities had risen and fallen. But from their ashes emerged a new constellation of city-states, more focused, more competitive, more divine. This was the beginning of the classic period, c. 250 to 900 CE, an era of imperial ambition, astronomical mastery, and a feverish compulsion to etch history into eternity. Nowhere was this transformation more profound than in the sprawling Petén Basin of modern-day Guatemala, a dense, humid jungle that concealed not only the roots of mighty sabas, but the soaring towers of future kings. At the heart of this burgeoning world stood Tikal, a city that would rise to dominate the Maya lowlands in size, influence, and spiritual authority. Known in ancient glyphs as Yaxmutal, Tikal was already a ceremonial center by the late pre-classic, but in the classic period, it evolved into a royal superpower, its skyline a jagged crown of pyramids and temples reaching toward the sky gods. By the 3rd century CE, Tikal's rulers had begun erecting stelae. Tall stone monuments carved with elaborate glyphs and portraits of kings, announcing their victories, rituals, and divine legitimacy. These weren't mere inscriptions. They were cosmic declarations, aligning events on Earth with sacred dates in the Maya calendar system. Every birth, every coronation, every war was choreographed according to the movement of the stars. Tikal's power was tied not just to its religious status but to its strategic acumen. Its rulers forged alliances and trade routes that brought in jade from the Motagua Valley, obsidian from the Guatemalan highlands, cacao from the lowland forests, and shells from the Caribbean coast. The city became a hub where material wealth, military power, and religious authority intertwined. One of Tikal's most celebrated kings was Chichén Itzá, who came to power in 682 CE during a time of political recovery. Tikal had been subdued for decades by a powerful rival, Calakmul, a city that rose to the north like a storm cloud. Calakmul, known as Canul or the Kingdom of the Snake, had emerged as Tikal's bitter adversary in what would become one of the greatest rivalries in pre-Columbian history. The two cities, separated by vast forests and hostile territory, waged a centuries-long dynastic Cold War, pulling dozens of smaller city-states into their orbit as vassals, allies, or pawns. Calakmul's kings, often using serpent iconography, styled themselves as world rulers, a claim etched into stelae and codices across the Maya lowlands. The Snake Dynasty, as it's now called by scholars, was a cunning political machine. Through warfare, marriage alliances, and diplomatic subversion, it sought to undermine Tikal's supremacy and establish its own hegemony. The two powers clashed in repeated military campaigns, known today thanks to surviving inscriptions. Battles weren't simply territorial disputes, they were cosmic contests, staged to coincide with celestial phenomena, designed to humiliate rival kings and validate one's divine right to rule. In 695 CE, Chichén Itzá of Tikal launched a decisive counteroffensive, defeating Calakmul in a campaign so monumental it was commemorated in Temple I, the Temple of the Great Jaguar, a 47-meter pyramid that still towers over the Grand Plaza of Tikal today. His burial within the temple, surrounded by jade and treasures, confirmed his apotheosis not just as a ruler, but as a divine ancestor. This period saw the emergence of theocratic monarchy at its zenith. Maya kings weren't just rulers, they were living conduits between the gods and the mortal world. They performed elaborate rituals of auto-sacrifice, offering their own blood to nourish the cosmos. These acts, performed on temple rooftops during solar events, reinforced their status as divine intermediaries. Their palaces, like those at Copan in Honduras or Palenque in Chiapas, were not merely administrative centers. They were cosmic theaters, where rulers enacted sacred myths through architecture, dance, and drama. Every carved panel, every painted frieze, was a scripture in stone, communicating lineage, power, and the eternal cycle of time. The artistry of this era was unparalleled. Intricately carved lintels from Yaxchilan, stucco masks from Uxmal, and the haunting temple tomb of King Pakal the Great in Palenque speak to a civilization obsessed with death, not as an end, but as a transformation. Kings were buried in crypts that mirrored the underworld, their passage to the afterlife mapped through glyphs and celestial alignments. Yet the glory of Tikal and Calakmul was mirrored by hundreds of other city-states, each with its own court, priesthood, calendar, and military ambition. Cities like Caracol, Quirigua, Bonampak, Dos Pilas, and Copan flourished during this time, forming a dense geopolitical web, where shifting alliances, betrayals, and ritual wars were the order of the day. This classic Maya world was not a static kingdom or empire. It was a constellation of sacred kingdoms, each asserting its place in the cosmos, each seeking favor with the gods, and each aware that power was as fleeting as the phases of Venus. By the mid-8th century, the classic world stood in majestic equilibrium. The rainforest rang with ceremony. Temples gleamed with fresh stucco. The scribes chronicled time with mathematical precision. The ballcourts echoed with sacred struggle. The king stood atop pyramids, blood streaming from wounds, eyes cast skyward toward the gods who whispered through the stars. But already, beneath this grandeur, the earth trembled. The balance was growing fragile. The center would not hold. Chapter 4, Divine Bloodlines, Ritual Kingship, Cosmology, and the Sacred Role of the Maya Ruler. In the Maya imagination, power was never a secular thing. It was sacred, cyclical, and celestial. To govern was not merely to issue commands or levy tribute, it was to uphold the very balance of the cosmos. The Maya king, known as the Keohul Ajah, literally, the Holy Lord, was a cosmic linchpin, anointed by gods, descended from divine ancestors, and charged with enacting rituals that sustained the spiritual health of the world. Kingship was not a privilege. It was a burden of sacred responsibility, one that demanded precision, sacrifice, and a lifelong performance of mythic symbolism. A Maya ruler's legitimacy was grounded in two fundamental forces: dynastic ancestry and cosmic time. Lineage was everything. Every king traced his descent from sacred founders, often mythologized as deities or primordial heroes. Dynastic histories were inscribed on stele and palace walls, not merely to record genealogy, but to affirm a ruler's place in the divine continuum, a cosmic bloodline linking past, present, and future through cycles of rebirth and celestial order. Birth was often timed or interpreted in relation to the sacred calendar, the 260-day tsokin, or the longer long count. An auspicious birthday might foretell a ruler's destiny, echoing mythological events or celestial alignments. Rulers were often depicted as avatars of gods, their names incorporating deities like Itzamnaj, Kawil, or Chuk. To bear the name of a god was not symbolic. It was a literal assumption of divine identity. Once enthroned, usually after a series of elaborate public rituals, a Maya king became the axis mundi, the center of the three-tiered Maya universe. The heavens above, the terrestrial plane, and the watery underworld below all intersected through his person. His palace was not just a seat of governance, it was a recreation of the cosmic mountain, where all planes of existence converged. His body became the site of cosmogenesis. This spiritual burden was expressed most vividly through the ritual of bloodletting. Unlike the dramatic human sacrifices associated with the Aztecs, the classic Maya emphasized auto-sacrifice, particularly among royalty and nobles. Using stingray spines, obsidian blades, or sharpened bone, kings and queens drew blood from the tongue, ears, or genitals. The blood was then captured on paper, which was burned in incense to send the offering skyward as smoke. This was not sadism, it was theology. Blood was the essence of creation, the same divine substance the gods had spilled to animate humanity. To offer one's own blood was to renew creation, to fulfill the covenant between mortals and gods. The pain was ecstatic, transformative. Participants often entered trance states, claiming visions of ancestors or gods materializing in serpent-shaped smoke curls above the altars. These ceremonies were timed with astronomical precision, often coordinated with solar eclipses, planetary conjunctions, or the sacred Venus cycle. The Maya tracked Venus with uncanny accuracy, recognizing its phases and alignments as markers of war, death, and rebirth. Kings would schedule rituals, wars, or accessions to coincide with Venus' heliacal rise, believing it amplified their divine connection. Cosmology saturated every aspect of royal life. The Maya envisioned the universe as a living tree, with roots in the underworld and branches reaching into the heavens. This world tree, often represented by the sacred ceiba, was both literal and symbolic. Temples were built in its image, with vertical tiers representing cosmic layers. Rulers stood at the tree's center, often portrayed emerging from its trunk or ascending its limbs to commune with gods. Even the built environment reflected royal theology. Temples like the Temple of the Inscriptions in Palenque were constructed as cosmograms, encoding myths, calendar systems, and genealogies into their architecture. The tomb of Pakal the Great, buried deep within that very temple, depicts him descending into the underworld, surrounded by a cosmic tree and glyphs marking sacred time. It was not a grave, it was a blueprint for rebirth, a stone prophecy etched in the language of the stars. Royal women also played vital roles in this cosmic choreography. Queens and royal mothers were often depicted performing blood rituals, invoking gods, and legitimizing their sons' rule. In some cases, such as Lady Kabul of El Peruwaka or Lady Six Sky of Naranjo, women took the throne directly, waging wars and commissioning monuments with the same divine authority as men. But Maya kingship was always conditional. A ruler's right to govern was tied not only to blood but to performance. If he failed to bring rain, if he lost in battle, if he fell out of alignment with the stars, his legitimacy crumbled. The gods demanded results. And when kings failed, their monuments were defaced, their names erased from stele, their lineages cut from the thread of time. Still, when it worked, when the blood flowed, the rituals aligned, and the stars danced in favor, a Maya king became something more than human. He became a living myth, a being suspended between history and eternity, a figure who shaped the heavens and walked the sacred avenues of stone cities crowned by pyramids that scraped the sky. This was not politics. This was divine theater, a living religion carved into every temple step, painted on every ceramic vessel, and whispered into the sacred calendars that outlasted the kings themselves. And yet, even as this cosmological machinery hummed at full strength, cracks were forming beneath the surface. The gods were watching. The people were whispering. The world that had been crafted with such exquisite balance was beginning to tilt. Chapter 5, Cities in the Stars, Maya Architecture, Astronomy, and the Urban Sacred. To walk through a classic Maya city was not merely to traverse an urban landscape. It was to enter a cosmic diagram, a carefully crafted model of the universe where every pyramid, plaza, and pathway was infused with theological meaning. These cities were not assembled haphazardly. They were ritual machines, constructed to mirror the heavens, honor ancestors, and channel the invisible energies that course through time and space. Unlike the rigid grid patterns of Roman towns or the geometrical perfection of Incan terraces, Maya cities embraced a more organic yet cosmologically precise layout. Their planning was governed by the movement of celestial bodies, particularly the Sun, Moon, Venus, and constellations like the Pleiades. Temples were aligned to solstices and equinoxes. Palace windows framed rising stars. Ballcourts echoed mythic underworlds. In every direction, sacred geography unfolded. At the heart of these cities stood their most iconic structures, pyramidal temples, soaring above the forest canopy like man-made mountains. These were not tombs in the Egyptian sense, nor mere platforms for rituals. They were symbolic recreations of the world mountain, the axis mundi of Maya cosmology, where the divine emerged into the human realm. Each pyramid was meticulously constructed. Massive limestone blocks, quarried and hauled by human labor without metal tools or draft animals, were stacked and stuccoed with precision. Often, earlier pyramids were encased within newer ones, creating layered monuments that mirrored cycles of death and rebirth. The result was both physical and symbolic accumulation, generations of history literally embedded in stone. These pyramids often culminated in roof combs, lattice-like stone crests that crowned the summit temples, amplifying their visual impact and enhancing their symbolic elevation. The famed temples of Tikal, with their slender verticality, seem less like buildings and more like ladders to the heavens. But Maya architecture extended beyond temples. Palaces, often sprawling and labyrinthine, served as royal residences and ceremonial theaters. They were richly decorated with carved lintels, mosaic facades, and painted murals. Palenque's Palace of the Inscriptions, for instance, houses one of the most sophisticated tombs in Mesoamerican history, that of King Pacal, whose sarcophagus lid is famously etched with a scene of cosmic transformation, often misinterpreted by pseudoscientists as a depiction of a spaceship. Ballcourts, present in nearly every major city, were also architecturally significant. Their shape, a narrow alley flanked by sloped walls, represented the passage between life and death. The game played within them, part sport and part sacred drama, reenacted the myth of the hero twins who defeated the lords of the underworld in the Popol Vuh, the sacred Maya text. These spaces were not for leisure, but for ritual performance, where players might be sacrificed not as punishment, but as sacred offering. Perhaps most striking of all is how Maya cities functioned as observatories. Long before Galileo turned his lens to the sky, Maya priests and astronomers were tracking the movement of stars with naked-eye precision. The E-group complexes found in sites like Uxacton were arranged to mark solstices and equinoxes. The 4 stairways of Chichén Itzá's Temple of Kukulkan each contain 91 steps, 364 total, plus 1 platform, adding up to the 365 days of the solar year. During equinoxes, a serpent-shaped shadow slithers down the pyramid's flank, merging with stone serpent heads at its base, a breathtaking choreography of light, stone, and myth. Venus held particular importance. The Maya knew its synodic cycle, 584 days, with such accuracy that they predicted its risings and settings centuries in advance. This knowledge was encoded in the Codex Dresden, one of the few surviving Maya books, where Venus tables dictated the timing of wars, royal rituals, and harvests. A king would not declare war lightly, it had to be when Venus appeared as the morning star, signaling aggression, power, and divine mandate. Architecture became a mnemonic device. It was a vessel for memory and myth. The murals of Bonampak depicted courtly life and ritual bloodletting in vivid color, offering a visual narrative of politics and devotion. The stele of Köpen recounted dynastic histories with glyphic text and regal imagery. The Temple of the Cross group at Palenque encoded cosmological events and calendrical cycles in stone relief. Even public plazas were sacred arenas. Designed to hold thousands of spectators, they became the stages upon which divine history was reenacted. Ritual dances, kingly ascensions, bloodletting ceremonies, and mythic dramas. These were not passive rituals, but immersive acts in which the city itself became a living mythological landscape. And the cities lived in time as much as in space. Each construction was tied to a date in the long count calendar, each addition to a building was commemorated with a ceremony timed to sacred numerology. Time wasn't just tracked. It was built into the walls, the orientation of doorways, the layout of streets. The Maya didn't merely inhabit time. They sculpted it. Thus, Maya cities were not only expressions of human ingenuity, they were cosmic replicas, attempts to bring harmony between the divine and the earthly. To enter a city like Tikal or Palenque was to enter a ritual machine, where space and time collapsed, and the human walked in step with the divine. But this sacred complexity was not eternal. For beneath the splendor, something had begun to fray. Drought whispered through the trees. Wars grew bloodier. The gods grew quiet. The temples still stood tall, but their silence grew louder. Chapter 6, Collapse and Silence, The Fall of the Classic Maya World. By the late 8th and early 9th centuries, the great Maya cities that had once pierced the sky with pyramids and echoed with sacred rituals began to falter. One by one, the shining centers of the southern lowlands, Tikal, Köpen, Palenque, Calakmul, entered into decline. Their stelae ceased to be raised. Their palaces were abandoned. Their ballcourts fell silent. It was as if the stars themselves had dimmed and the world they had so carefully aligned to the heavens began to fall out of rhythm. The collapse of the classic Maya world is one of the most enduring mysteries in archaeology and history, not because we lack evidence, but because the cause was not singular. It was not a comet, nor a conquering enemy, nor a single failed harvest. Instead, it was a slow-motion disintegration, the unraveling of a complex tapestry woven from environmental fragility, political overreach, social unrest, and spiritual crisis. At the heart of the collapse was ecological strain. The Maya lowlands, though rich in biodiversity, were never naturally suited to supporting massive urban populations. As cities like Tikal and Calakmul grew, they placed increasing demands on their environment. Forests were cleared not only for farmland, but for construction material and fuel to produce stucco. The very plaster that made temples gleam white in the sun required massive amounts of lime, produced by burning limestone, which in turn consumed vast quantities of wood. Deforestation led to soil erosion, declining crop yields, and increasing vulnerability to drought. And drought did come. Paleoclimatology now confirms that a series of prolonged droughts struck the Maya lowlands between the 8th and 10th centuries. Lake sediment cores, cave stalagmites, and isotopic analysis all reveal that rainfall dropped dramatically. These weren't short-term dry spells, they were systemic failures of the seasonal monsoon cycle. In a civilization where rain was divine, where Chak the rain god was invoked with sacrifice and dance, such a drought was not just an environmental crisis. It was a cosmic betrayal. The spiritual compact had failed. Kings, who had once bled for the gods to ensure fertility and cosmic balance, now seemed powerless. Their rituals no longer brought the rain. Their blood no longer nourished the maize. Faith faltered, and with it, the legitimacy of the ruling class. In Köpen, records show a dramatic shift, elaborate monuments ceased, and new kings failed to build in the grand tradition of their predecessors. In Palenque, royal lines ended, and the city fell into decay. At the same time, internal conflict intensified. Cities began to turn on each other with increasing frequency. The wars that had once been timed with Venus and framed in ritual began to grow more destructive. Smaller city-states were swallowed by larger powers. Refugees fled into forests or mountains. The great balance of power that had allowed multiple dynasties to coexist collapsed into fractured violence. Inscriptions from sites like Dos Pilas and Aguatica document the political upheaval in chilling detail: kings captured, cities sacked, royal lineages extinguished. Aguatica, once a thriving center of the Patexbaden region, was burned and abandoned so suddenly that archaeologists found the belongings of its nobles still intact: writing tools, garments, jewelry, frozen in time like Pompeii under ash. Meanwhile, trade routes collapsed. Without centralized authority to protect them, long-distance exchange in jade, obsidian, cacao, and salt ground to a halt. Economic systems that had sustained elite lifestyles and temple construction fell apart. The artisans, scribes, and farmers that had supported the elite apparatus either fled, perished, or abandoned the system altogether. Some scholars suggest social revolution played a role. The vast inequality of Maya society, where the nobility lived in stone palaces while commoners farmed for subsistence, may have become unsustainable in times of crisis. Uprisings or abandonment of cities by disillusioned populations may have hastened the downfall of the elite. But perhaps most haunting was the spiritual silence that followed. Stelae, the sacred stones that told the story of time, stopped being carved. Calendrical records ceased. The great rituals of the calendar, once performed by divine kings on mountaintop temples, no longer occurred. The cities themselves, these cosmic engines of myth and memory, were left to the jungle. By 900 CE, the heart of the classic Maya world, the central and southern lowlands, was a shadow of its former self. Cities like Tikal, once home to tens of thousands, were abandoned. Their temples stood empty. The jungle began to reclaim its dominion, vines snaking over altars, trees bursting through palace walls. The calendar still ticked onward, but the hands that once measured it were gone. Yet it is crucial to understand that this was not an apocalypse. It was not the end of the Maya. To the north and in the highlands, Maya culture persisted and adapted. Cities like Chichén Itzá, Uxmal, and Mayapan would rise in the post-classic era. Maya language, art, and religion would survive Spanish conquest, colonialism, and modernity. The people endured, even as the classic world fell. The collapse was the end of an era, not of a civilization. And like a dormant seed in dry soil, the Maya world would sprout again, reconfiguring itself for a new cycle. Chapter 7, Shadows and Serpents, Chichén Itzá, the Toltec influence, and the post-classic Maya. When the cities of the southern lowlands fell into ruin and their kings vanished from the stele, many scholars once believed the Maya story had ended. But to walk among the towering colonnades of Chichén Itzá, or to gaze upon the serpent shadow that slithers down the temple of Kukulkan, is to understand that Maya civilization did not die, it transformed. The post-classic period, c. 900 to 1500 CE, ushered in a new political and spiritual order, one forged in the crucible of collapse. Unlike the centralized divine kingships of the classic age, the post-classic Maya world was more fluid, militarized, and cosmopolitan. New cities rose, not in the rainforest lowlands, but across the northern Yucatan Peninsula, on limestone plateaus where cenotes, natural sinkholes, became the sacred reservoirs of life and sacrifice. Foremost among these new centers was Chichén Itzá, a city whose name means, at the mouth of the well of the Itzá. Located near a massive cenote that would become both a pilgrimage site and a sacrificial altar, Chichén Itzá grew into the most powerful urban center in northern Yucatan. Its architecture, unlike that of Tikal or Copan, reflects a startling new aesthetic, blending Maya and Toltec motifs, fusing serpent deities with military regalia, and replacing divine kingship with shared rule or councils of lords. Chichén Itzá's rise around the 10th century CE was marked by an infusion of foreign influence, particularly from central Mexico. This has long fueled debate: did the Toltecs of Tula, north of modern-day Mexico City, conquer Chichén Itzá? Did they migrate peacefully? Or was this fusion the result of long-standing trade and cultural exchange? What's certain is that Toltec iconography, feathered serpents, skull racks, warriors, and Atlantean columns, appears prominently throughout the city. The Great Pyramid of Chichén Itzá, known today as El Castillo, the castle, is dedicated to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, a deity clearly linked to Quetzalcoatl of central Mexican fame. This god, a symbol of wisdom, wind, and resurrection, replaced or merged with earlier Maya deities in public worship. El Castillo is not only a marvel of architecture, it is a masterwork of astronomy and acoustic engineering. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, shadows cast by the pyramid steps create the illusion of a serpent descending the stairway, a symbolic descent of Kukulkan from the heavens to the earth. This effect, which continues to draw pilgrims and tourists today, reveals the continuity of cosmological design in post-classic architecture. Nearby stands the Temple of the Warriors, fronted by a massive plaza lined with hundreds of columns. Each column once supported wooden roofs and bore images of warriors in bas-relief, a militarized vision of Maya society that contrasted sharply with the theological calm of earlier cities. Here, rulership was no longer the divine burden of a single king, but the consensus of a militarized elite, possibly a council or confederation of ruling houses. Chichén Itzá also housed the largest ballcourt in Mesoamerica, an arena over 150 meters long, with walls decorated with scenes of decapitation and divine transformation. The game played here had grown more violent, more theatrical, reflecting a society where sacrifice and conquest were public spectacle, not just religious necessity. Perhaps most chilling is the sacred cenote, where offerings of jade, gold, and human victims were cast into the deep green waters. Archaeological dives have uncovered the remains of men, women, and children, some bound, others decapitated, offered to the gods in hopes of rain, fertility, and protection. To the post-classic Maya, the cenote was a portal to the underworld, a place where the surface and spirit worlds touched. Yet Chichén Itzá was more than a city of sacrifice. It was a thriving trade hub, connected by roads and canoes to the rest of the Maya world and beyond. Goods like cacao, salt, obsidian, feathers, honey, and copper flowed through its markets. The presence of objects from distant cultures, Toltec, Gulf Coast, even Nawa, suggests a far-reaching economic and cultural influence. By the 12th century, however, Chichén Itzá began to wane. The reasons remain unclear. Perhaps internal strife, drought, or the rise of rival cities like Mayapan played a role. What is clear is that the city was largely abandoned as a political capital, though it remained a pilgrimage site well into the Spanish colonial period. The power vacuum left by Chichén Itzá was soon filled by Mayapan, which rose to prominence in the 13th century as a new political center in northern Yucatan. Heavily fortified and more ethnically homogeneous, Mayapan represented a new order, one of tighter central control, increased militarism, and complex political alliances. But it too would fall into decline by the mid-15th century, brought down by civil war and rebellion. Across the Maya world, the post-classic period was marked by fragmentation. Dozens of smaller city-states, each with its own ruling house, vied for power. Warfare became more constant. Religious imagery turned more apocalyptic. Writing and monumental architecture, while still practiced, became less grand. Trade shifted eastward to Caribbean ports like Tulum, Cozumel, and Isla Mujeres, where seaborne commerce flourished. Yet even in this time of change and conflict, Maya culture endured. Rituals, language, and cosmology evolved but never disappeared. Sacred books, written in hieroglyphic script on bark paper codices, continued to be produced and preserved by priestly elites. The gods still spoke. The calendar still turned. The stars were still watched. And then, on the distant horizon, sails appeared. With them came a force unlike any the Maya had known, not a rival city, but a new world. Chapter 8, Cross and Conquest, the arrival of the Spanish and the Maya resistance. By the early 16th century, the Maya world was fragmented into a patchwork of independent city-states, each with its own alliances, rivalries, and dynastic ambitions. The monumental splendor of cities like Tikal and Chichén Itzá had faded, but the Maya were far from gone. From the highlands of Guatemala to the coasts of Yucatan, they lived on, farming, trading, worshipping, and measuring time in the ancient ways. It was into this world, already complex and volatile, that the Spanish conquistadors arrived, bearing muskets, steel, disease, and a missionary zeal forged in the fires of Europe's religious wars. Unlike the rapid fall of the Aztec and Inca empires, the Spanish conquest of the Maya was a drawn-out, bloody, and uneven struggle that spanned nearly 2 centuries. The first Spanish contact came in 1511, when a Spanish caravel wrecked along the Yucatan coast. Survivors were captured by Maya lords, most were sacrificed, but a few, like Gonzalo Guerrero, assimilated, marrying into local elites and even fighting against later Spanish expeditions. By 1517, Spanish expeditions under Francisco Hernández de Córdoba began probing deeper into the peninsula, encountering resistance and heavy casualties. The Maya did not welcome foreign gods. In 1524, the renowned conquistador Pedro de Alvarado, fresh from his brutal campaigns in the Aztec heartland, marched into the highlands of Guatemala. There, he encountered the Chichén Maya, a militarized kingdom whose capital, Camarcage, stood atop a volcanic plateau. Though Alvarado succeeded in capturing the city and executing its rulers, the conquest was far from complete. The rugged terrain, combined with the decentralized nature of Maya society, made total domination nearly impossible. Unlike centralized empires, Maya resistance could not be toppled by capturing a single ruler or capital. Each city-state, each mountain village, each coastal town was its own node of power. The Spanish found themselves embroiled in a labyrinth of shifting alliances, guerrilla tactics, and spiritual resistance that defied the pattern of swift conquest. Throughout the 16th century, campaigns continued. Cities like Tayasal in the Petén region of Guatemala resisted Spanish control until 1697, making it one of the last independent polities in the Americas. Spanish troops had to cross Lake Chichén Itzá with ships, constructed piece by piece in the forest, just to storm the island city. And still, even where military conquest succeeded, cultural conquest struggled. The Maya worldview was not so easily erased. The Spanish introduced the cross, the Bible, and the sword, but beneath the outward symbols of conversion, many Maya continued to practice their traditional religion, hiding their gods behind saints or secretly tending to sacred caves, mountains, and trees. But there were losses that cannot be forgotten. In 1562, under the zealous eyes of Diego de Landa, Bishop of Yucatan, one of the darkest moments in Maya cultural history occurred. Alarmed by the persistence of indigenous beliefs, de Landa conducted inquisitions, torture, and finally ordered the burning of Maya codices, bark paper books filled with centuries of astronomical observations, mythology, and ritual knowledge. Only 4 known codices survive today, fragments of a once vast library of ancient thought. De Landa would later write Relation de las Cosas de Yucatán, a key source for modern scholars. Ironic, given he had personally incinerated the very texts that now lie forever beyond recovery. Yet even amid devastation, the Maya endured. They adapted. They resisted. They revolted. Time and again, they rose up, in 1546, in 1638, in 1761, led by visionaries and prophets, calling upon the gods of their ancestors to push back against Spanish rule. In the highlands, the Popol Vuh, the great Maya book of creation, was preserved by Kich scribes in secret, its glyphs phonetically rendered into Roman letters under the cloak of Christianized names. Some Maya communities fled deeper into forests, mountains, and swamps, creating semi-autonomous enclaves that kept their traditions alive. Others interwove the new faith with the old, seeing in the Virgin Mary echoes of Nine Chel, and in Christ's suffering the mirrored bloodletting of divine kings. What the Spanish could not destroy was the Maya spirit. Resilient, cyclical, grounded in time and earth. Even when the calendar stones were shattered, the count of days continued. The priests remembered. The healers remembered. The people remembered. So while the conquest may have ended the independent Maya kingdoms, it did not erase the Maya. Their languages still survive, spoken by millions across Mesoamerica. Their rituals, though transformed, still echo in holy days and sacred landscapes. And their vision of time, of cosmos, of the divine interplay between stars and maize, still guides many who walk the jungles, coasts, and highlands their ancestors once ruled. Chapter 9, Cycles Unbroken, The Living Maya and the Legacy of a Civilization. The story of the Maya did not end with conquest, nor did it vanish into the jungle like the moss-covered stelae of Copan or the temples of Tikal swallowed by trees. The Maya live on. Not as ghosts of a vanished past, but as millions of men, women, and children, who speak their ancestral languages, till the same soil their forebears farmed, and still gaze skyward to read the rhythms of time. Today, there are more than 7 million Maya people spread across southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. In Guatemala, they make up a significant portion of the population, speaking over 20 distinct Maya languages, including Kich, Quechua, Mam, and Yucatec. These are not dialects of nostalgia. They are living languages, used in homes, schools, marketplaces, and ritual ceremonies, each a living thread in the rich weave of cultural continuity. The legacy of the ancient Maya is everywhere. In the highlands of Guatemala, women weave with patterns that echo cosmological symbolism first seen in classic period murals. In the villages of Chiapas, day keepers still count the sacred Tzolk'in calendar, assigning spiritual meanings to each day and offering blessings based on its characteristics. In Yucatan, healers known as H-men conduct traditional ceremonies that blend Catholic saints with ancient deities, invoking rain, fertility, and ancestral guidance in ways that would have been recognizable to their ancestors 1,000 years ago. Maya spirituality today is a syncretic marvel, a fusion of pre-Columbian cosmology and colonial Catholicism. But this is not mere survival, it is transformation without surrender. The ancient gods have not died. They have changed masks, found new names, and continue to be honored through fire, incense, dance, and prayer. At sacred caves like Acton Tunikil Muknal, or atop highland altars, offerings of candles, copal, maize, and liquor are made not to historical memory, but to living forces, the spirits of the land, the guardians of time, the echoes of ancestors whose voices still resonate in ritual song. Maya communities continue to hold fire ceremonies timed to equinoxes, solstices, and the agricultural calendar. These events are not folkloric reenactments, they are moments of cosmic communion, when the cycles of the earth and sky are acknowledged and renewed. In recent decades, the revival and reassertion of Maya identity has taken on new strength. After centuries of marginalization and persecution, especially during Guatemala's brutal civil war in the late 20th century, where indigenous communities suffered massacres and systemic oppression, Maya people have begun to reclaim their cultural sovereignty. Activists, educators, linguists, and spiritual leaders now work to preserve Maya languages, teach Maya history, and revitalize traditional knowledge systems. Bilingual schools, cultural centers, and community organizations have sprung up across the Maya world, ensuring that children grow up not only learning Spanish or English, but their ancestral tongues and the wisdom embedded within them. There is also a renewed pride in Maya science and astronomy. What was once dismissed by colonial chroniclers as primitive myth has now been recognized as sophisticated mathematics and empirical observation. Scholars and indigenous elders alike are reinterpreting the Maya codices, studying the architectural alignments of ancient cities, and bringing to light the vast intellectual achievements of their forebears. Even the misunderstood Maya calendar, which captured global attention during the 2012 phenomenon, has emerged from the shadow of doomsday hysteria to be appreciated for what it truly is, a cyclical and deeply symbolic system, one that views time not as a line, but as an eternal spiral. An ever-turning wheel of beginnings, endings, and renewals. The 2012 long count reset was not an apocalypse. It was a new Bacton, a fresh cycle in the cosmic rhythm, an invitation to begin again. Perhaps that is the most enduring legacy of the Maya, their understanding of time as sacred motion, of life as a cycle, and of history not as a fading past, but as a living continuum. They remind us that civilizations may rise and fall, but cultures rooted in the land, in memory, and in meaning endure far beyond stone. Their pyramids may crumble, but their stories do not. Their kings may sleep beneath temples, but their descendants walk freely beneath the same stars. Their gods may wear new names, but their essence still moves through wind, fire, maize, and blood. The Maya are not lost. They are here, watching, speaking, remembering. The calendar turns. The stories continue. The cycle remains unbroken. Chapter 10, Echoes Through Time, the Universal Legacy of the Maya. In the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, where temples rise like forgotten mountains and trees whisper the names of kings, the Maya carved a civilization of startling brilliance, not only in stone, but in the architecture of the heavens, in the choreography of time, and in the quiet endurance of a people who would not be erased. But the Maya are more than a regional legacy. Their story is a mirror, a message etched across centuries for all of humanity. Their achievements speak not just to past glories, but to enduring truths, about time, nature, memory, resilience, and the fragile brilliance of human complexity. Few civilizations in human history have understood time as deeply as the Maya. While the modern world chases seconds, the Maya saw eternity in cycles, days as energies, years as spirits, centuries as waves in a sea of divine order. Their long count calendar reaches backward and forward across millennia, situating every event within the pulse of the cosmos. From this, we learn humility. We are not apart from time. We are made of it. Their cities, though now partially reclaimed by jungle, were once monuments to meaning, not built for dominance, but for harmony. Every pyramid was a mountain. Every temple a star map. Every plaza a theater of sacred history. In a time when urban sprawl too often cuts us off from the sky, the Maya remind us that cities can be designed to reflect the stars, not to outshine them. Their science was mystical, their mysticism scientific. They calculated the synodic cycle of Venus to within 2 hours. They aligned buildings to solstices with naked eyes. Their mathematics included the zero, a concept the old world did not fully embrace for centuries. Yet this precision served not conquest or empire alone. It served cosmic balance, a sense of being rightly placed in the living web of things. Perhaps most powerful of all is the lesson of their resilience. Despite droughts, wars, collapse, and colonization, the Maya endured. When their cities fell, their language lived. When their books were burned, their rituals continued. When their kings were silenced, their daykeepers still counted the sacred calendar in whispers. This is not mere survival. It is cultural genius, the ability to adapt, resist, remember, and transform without ever losing the soul of who they are. In our own time of ecological upheaval, political unrest, and spiritual searching, the Maya offer not just a history, but a possibility. A way of seeing the earth as sacred, time as living, ancestors as present, and culture as a seed that can grow again, even from the ashes. Their ruins are not dead. They are sleeping altars, waiting for us to listen. Their stories are not past. They are currents, flowing quietly through language, ceremony, and song. The Maya did not vanish. They are not myth. They are not mystery. They are not lost. They are here. And through them, we remember that all civilizations are temporary, but meaning endures, and cycles return, and voices rise again, if we have the ears to hear. Final words. To study the Maya is not simply to gaze into the depths of ancient America. It is to confront the endurance of human imagination, the beauty of a world where science and spirit were never separate, and the reminder that in every fall, there is the seed of rebirth. This was the story of the Maya. Not of their disappearance, but of their persistence. Not of decline, but of return. Not of endings, but of eternal cycles. The calendar turns. The sun rises. The story continues.